My name is Lena, and what I'm about to tell you still haunts me to this day. I love to travel. There's something freeing about exploring new places, staying in charming little rentals, and waking up to a view you've never seen before. I've always been careful. I read reviews, I checked the locks, I trust my instincts. But this time, I missed something. I never thought a simple week-long stay in an Airbnb would turn into my worst nightmare. This was about 3 months ago. I booked the place online. The photos made it look perfect. Cozy, warm lighting, a rustic charm that felt safe. The reviews were great, no red flags. The host, a man named Daniel, was polite in his messages, even offering local recommendations. When I arrived, the house was just as described. A small, one-bedroom space with wooden floors, a fireplace, and a huge inviting bed. The bathroom was modern, with a large mirror above the sink. Everything felt normal. The first night was peaceful. I made some tea, watched TV, and dozed off. But around 3 a.m., a clicking sound woke me up. It was faint, rhythmic, like the sound of a pen clicking. I lay still, my heart pounding and thinking, what was that? Maybe it was the heater or old pipes. That's what I told myself. The sound eventually stopped, so I forced myself back to sleep. But the next night, it happened again. This time, it felt closer. I turned on the light, scanning the room, but nothing. No movement, no shadows, nothing. I felt ridiculous. Maybe I was just paranoid, but something still felt wrong. The third morning, while brushing my teeth, I noticed something strange. A tiny hole in the bathroom mirror. At first, I thought it was just a scratch, but something about it felt too deliberate, so I leaned in closer. My breath fogged up the glass. Then, on a gut feeling, I pulled out my phone's flashlight. I pressed it against the hole, and my stomach dropped. There was a camera inside, a tiny black lens, hidden behind the glass, staring right at me. My hands went ice cold. My skin prickled. How long had it been watching me? A wave of nausea hit me. I stumbled back, my mind racing. Was it recording? Who was watching? Was it live? Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had to check the rest of the house. My hands shook as I searched. I took the vent cover off and found another camera. I unplugged the bedside lamp, lifted it, another lens tucked inside. My chest tightened. They were everywhere, the bathroom, the bedroom, the living room. I was being watched every moment, every second. I grabbed my bags, ran out of the house, and jumped into my car, locking the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type as I called the police. I gave them the address, explaining everything in a breathless panic. They told me to stay away from the house. I didn't need to be told twice. I booked a hotel that night, but I barely slept. I felt exposed, like eyes were still on me. My mind kept replaying every private moment I'd had in that Airbnb. Had they been watching me shower, change, sleep? The thought made my skin crawl. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the police. They had searched the Airbnb. The cameras were real, and it was worse than I imagined. The cameras had been hidden all over the house, recording every single guest who had stayed there for years. The owner, Daniel, had been selling the footage online. My stomach churned. Oh my God. Then the officer hesitated before saying something that made my blood run cold. He said, "Miss, we found your videos. They were uploaded before you even knew you were being watched." My breath caught in my throat. It was already out there. Somewhere on the internet, strangers had seen me, watched me in my most private moments. I wanted to scream, to erase it all, to rewind time and never book that Airbnb. Daniel was arrested. The police shut the place down, but it didn't change the fact that my privacy was already stolen. I deleted my social media, changed my email, even moved to a different apartment, but I still don't feel safe, because even now sometimes I swear I hear that sound. I love finding hidden gems on Airbnb, places with character off the beaten path. But when I booked my stay in that old Victorian house in a small town, I had no idea I was stepping into something far more sinister than I could have imagined. The listing described the house as a vintage Victorian mansion, recently renovated to preserve its old-world charm. It had high ceilings, ornate woodwork, and large windows that gave it an almost eerie elegance. The kind of place you'd imagine in a period drama, the ones that make you feel like time moves differently within its walls. I was instantly drawn to it, feeling excited about the idea of escaping the chaos of city life for a weekend in a secluded home. The price was reasonable too. It felt too good to pass up. The house was even more breathtaking in person. Tucked away in a quiet corner of town, surrounded by trees and mist, it was almost like a fairy tale setting, though I had a nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. The house was perfectly quiet, a stark contrast to the world outside. The host, an older woman named Margaret, greeted me with a warm smile. Her appearance was as classic as the house itself. She seemed pleasant, but there was an odd, almost unsettling air about her. She welcomed me into the house, offering a brief tour. The place was even more beautiful inside. Dark wood floors that creaked underfoot, antique chandeliers casting dim golden light. It had a kind of atmosphere that felt as if the past still lingered in the corners of every room. Margaret was careful to show me every room, except for one, a small door near the back of the house, almost hidden behind a bookshelf. "This room is off limits to guests," she said, with a slight hesitation in her voice. I asked why, but she only smiled faintly, as if that was all the explanation I would need. "It's best not to disturb it," she added, and that was all. I didn't think much of it at the time. I assumed it was some private storage area, or maybe a part of the house that hadn't been updated yet. But something about that door stuck in my mind, a small, nagging curiosity that grew stronger as the day wore on. That evening, after a long day of exploring the nearby town and enjoying the solitude, I found myself back at the house, standing before that door once again. It was strange how it seemed to call to me, drawing me in. The house was so quiet, so still. The only sound was the soft rustling of the wind outside, barely audible through the thick walls. But inside, it was a different kind of silence, unnerving, almost oppressive. The door wasn't locked. It was heavy, old-fashioned, like something out of a haunted house movie. I reached for the handle and turned it, my hand trembling slightly. The door creaked open with a noise that seemed too loud in the quiet of the house. Inside was a small, dimly lit room. Barely any furniture except for an old dusty chair sitting in the center of the room. The air felt thicker, like it didn't belong to the rest of the house. What caught my attention, however, was the walls. They were covered in deep, long scratches. At first, I thought it was just the effects of age, but as I looked closer, I realized they weren't just marks left by time. These scratches were recent, jagged lines carved into the wood as though something or someone had tried desperately to escape. I couldn't tear my eyes away. My heart started racing, and a chill crept down my spine. I stepped closer to the walls, running my fingers over the deep gouges. They were still rough, as if they hadn't been there for long. But the worst part was the eerie stillness of the room. It was suffocating, like the air was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I backed away from the room quickly, shutting the door behind me. My heart was pounding in my chest. I had no explanation for what I'd just seen. That night I lay in bed, trying to shake the unease that had settled over me. But then, as the hours passed, I heard it, scratching. Soft, faint at first, but unmistakable. I thought I was imagining it, so I tried to ignore it. But then it came again. Closer this time. It wasn't from the walls, it was coming from behind that door. I jumped out of bed, my mind racing. What could it be? I called Margaret, my hands shaking, but she didn't answer. I tried again, but still no response. The scratching grew louder and more frantic, as if something or someone was trying to break through the door. I pressed my ear against the wall, listening for any signs of movement, but all I heard was the scratching and the sound of my own heart beating in my chest. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I spent hours lying awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the noises coming from the room. And when the morning came, I didn't waste any time. I packed my things and headed for the door. Margaret finally texted me just as I was about to leave. "I hope you enjoyed your stay," it said. "I'm sorry you had to leave so early. The room's history is best left untouched." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I didn't want to ask any more questions. I didn't want to know what was behind that door. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the house wasn't finished with me yet. When I got home, I started doing some research on the place. I found an old article about the house that described a disappearance. A young girl, the daughter of the previous owners, had gone missing over 30 years ago. She was last seen in that room, locked inside after an argument with her parents. The authorities never found her, and rumors spread that she had tried to escape, leaving those terrifying marks behind in the walls as she scratched at the door, desperate to get out. But no one had ever seen her again. Some said she never left. Her spirit, they said, still tried to claw its way out of that room every night. It was an ordinary day when my friend Sarah was chatting with her favorite waitress at their usual restaurant. Her name was Delia, and she was always friendly, always smiling, always there, so it was a bit odd when she hadn't shown up for work for a couple of weeks. Sarah thought maybe she had just taken some time off, but when Delia returned, she had a strange look in her eyes, the kind of look that suggested something was wrong, very wrong. It started with a casual conversation, something lighthearted. Delia didn't seem her usual self, and Sarah picked up on that immediately. The change wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to make her ask, "Hey Delia, where have you been? You were gone for a couple weeks. What happened?" Delia looked at her with wide eyes like she had just realized something. "What? They didn't tell you?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Sarah was confused and asked, "No. What happened?" Delia hesitated. Then she began to share a story that made Sarah's stomach churn, and as she listened, it made mine do the same. She explained how, a month ago, she had matched with a guy on Tinder. He seemed sweet, charming, good-looking. Everything was going well. They FaceTimed for hours, shared jokes, and talked about meeting up in person. Eventually, he asked if she'd like to come over for dinner. Delia, naturally flattered by the gesture, agreed. The guy, who we'll call Mark, went all out. He told her he'd cook her a homemade meal, something intimate, something personal. He made meatballs, a pie, all kinds of comfort food, and Delia thought it was a lovely touch. She ate everything. And why wouldn't she? She had no reason to think anything was wrong. He seemed normal. She was excited even. But what happened next still haunts her. It started with a stomach ache. Nothing too serious at first, but it worsened quickly. Delia felt nausea creep up on her, but it wasn't just the usual stomach flu. No, this was something different, something worse. She rushed to the bathroom, thinking it was just food poisoning. But as she knelt over the toilet, she began vomiting violently, more than she'd ever experienced. It wasn't just the usual stomach contents. She was vomiting blood. Panic surged through her. She dialed 911, and they told her to get to the ER immediately. She stumbled into her car, her body trembling, and drove herself there, barely able to keep her eyes open as the world around her spun. For the next 2 days, Delia lay in the hospital, hooked up to machines, drifting in and out of consciousness. When she finally woke up, there were 2 police officers standing beside her bed. They were serious, their faces unreadable, and one of the officers asked her, "Do you remember what you ate before you came in?" Delia, still disoriented, nodded slowly. "I had dinner with a guy I met on Tinder. He made me meatballs and pie." The officers exchanged glances before one of them spoke again. "Where did this happen? What was the address?" Delia gave them the address, her stomach sinking as she realized the situation wasn't normal. But it was when she mentioned the man's name and phone number that the officer's expressions grew darker. "You've eaten human flesh," the officer told her bluntly. Delia's blood ran cold. It didn't make sense. She couldn't process what she was hearing. She started to ask what had happened, but the words caught in her throat. "Who was he?" Delia asked, voice shaking. The police didn't give her much more information at first, but they took her to the address she had given them, the one where she had spent that fateful evening. It turned out to be an Airbnb, booked under a stolen credit card. The phone number was a burner. Everything about the man was fake, from the name he gave her to the images he had posted on Tinder. As the police dug deeper, they discovered something horrifying. Not only had he been using fake identities, but he had also been using Tinder to lure unsuspecting women into his trap. Delia was just one of many. But what made Delia's case different was what he had fed her. They later told her, after further investigation, that the flesh she had consumed wasn't just any human flesh. It had been embalmed. The moment they found that out, everything clicked. The vomiting blood, the intense sickness, it wasn't a random illness. It was deliberate. He had laced the meat with something toxic and then somehow had managed to cover it up, making it seem like a perfectly normal meal. The man was still at large, and he was reportedly still active in the LA area. Delia was left with nothing but the unsettling knowledge that someone she had trusted, someone she had met on a dating app, had done something unspeakable to her. What was worse was that the man had disappeared entirely, leaving no trace behind. His identity was a mystery, and Delia would never get answers. She was just left to try and move on, though the experience would never truly leave her. If you're using Tinder, or any other dating app for that matter, you should take caution. There are people out there with motives that go beyond what you could ever imagine. The danger is real, and it's still out there. The mystery of what happened to Delia is still unsolved, and the man who did this could be lurking anywhere. So if you're out there, be careful, and if you ever get an odd feeling about someone online, trust your instincts. Your safety matters more than anything. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway, just me and a few friends heading out to a secluded cabin in the woods. We were all looking forward to it. No cell service, no distractions, just a chance to reconnect with each other and enjoy the peace of nature. We found the perfect place online, nestled deep in the forest, far from any prying eyes. It was an old cabin, rustic but charming, with an open floor plan and large windows that gave us a breathtaking view of the surrounding trees. Perfect for a weekend of laughter, campfires, and storytelling. We arrived on a Friday evening, just as the sun was setting. The air was crisp and everything seemed serene. The cabin was cozy inside with a large stone fireplace and wooden beams that added to the charm. We unpacked, set up the fire, and cracked open some drinks. The night was off to a good start. As the evening wore on, we laughed, played games, and shared memories. The forest outside seemed to grow darker and quieter, with only the sound of the fire crackling in the background. But around midnight, something felt off. At first, it was just a shift in the atmosphere. The crackling of the fire seemed to grow distant, and a heavy silence began to settle in the cabin. We shrugged it off, thinking it was just the isolation. But then it happened. There was a soft knock on the door. It was so faint, I almost thought I imagined it. But when I glanced at my friends, their expressions mirrored mine. Confusion and unease. Who could be out there in the middle of the night? One of my friends, Luke, got up to answer the door, joking about it being a bear or a random hiker who had lost their way. But when he opened the door, there was no one there. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the smell of pine and earth. We all froze, our hearts pounding in our chests. Probably just some wildlife, Luke said, trying to ease the tension, though he didn't sound too convinced. He closed the door and locked it, but the air in the cabin felt heavier now, charged with something I couldn't explain. We all sat in silence for a while, each of us trying to shake off the unease. But then it came again. Another knock, louder this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps moving around the cabin. We all rushed to the windows, peering out into the blackness of the forest. Nothing. No movement, no figures, just darkness. Someone suggested it was probably someone playing a prank on us. After all, the cabin was remote, and maybe it was someone from a nearby house just messing with us. But the longer we stood there, staring out into the void, the more convinced I became that something wasn't right. Suddenly, the door handle jiggled. This time, we all heard it, clearly. Someone was trying to get in. Luke rushed to the door again, but before he could even reach it, we heard something that made our blood run cold. It was the sound of slow, deliberate breathing, deep and rasping, coming from just outside the door. We all froze, too terrified to move, but no one dared to speak. The heavy breathing continued right on the other side of the door, and then, without warning, it stopped. A long moment of silence stretched out, and it felt like the whole world was holding its breath with us. The tension was unbearable. Then, as if on cue, the door handle began to rattle once more, followed by a soft scraping noise like nails dragging across the wood. I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal. Of course, we were too far out to get any reception, but in that moment, it felt like the universe was conspiring against us. We huddled together, trying to figure out what to do. The knocking continued intermittently, each time closer to the door. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. We waited in complete silence for what felt like hours, too afraid to move, too afraid to speak. But nothing else happened. The forest outside was dead quiet. We couldn't even hear the wind anymore. It was as though the world had gone still. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, we cautiously opened the door. We stepped out into the cold night, scanning the area with our flashlights. The forest was empty. There was nothing, not a single person in sight. No footprints, no signs of anyone being there. We checked the perimeter of the cabin, half expecting to find something, anything, that could explain what had just happened. But there was nothing. No trace of anyone or anything that could have been responsible for the terrifying sounds. We stayed up the rest of the night, eyes wide open, every noise sending us into a panic. But by morning, the feeling of dread had dissipated. The sun was up and the woods were once again serene. We packed up and left the cabin early the next day. We didn't even talk about it on the way back. The silence in the car was deafening, each of us lost in our own thoughts. None of us had the courage to bring up what had happened, but the memory of those knocks, that eerie breathing, and the feeling of being watched would stay with us long after the weekend ended. To this day, we don't know who or what was out there that night. We never got a clear answer, but one thing's for sure. The woods around that cabin are far darker than we ever imagined, and whatever came knocking at midnight, it still haunts us. I've always had a thing for old buildings, especially ones with a history. So when I found an Airbnb listing for a charming, rustic inn that had been restored to preserve its vintage charm, I jumped at the chance. The reviews were glowing, claiming it was perfect for a weekend getaway, so I booked it without a second thought. Little did I know, I was about to uncover something far darker than I could have imagined. I arrived in the small town late in the afternoon, just as the sun began to dip behind the mountains. The inn was tucked away on the outskirts, nestled against the dense woods that stretched for miles. It looked picturesque, like something straight out of a storybook. Rustic, with ivy creeping up the stone walls and a cozy porch with rocking chairs. There was an air of calmness around the place, something peaceful, almost inviting. The host was a man named Martin, an older gentleman who greeted me with a warm smile. He told me that he had recently inherited the property from his grandmother, who had run the inn for decades. He seemed proud of the place, but there was something about his manner that seemed slightly distant, almost as if he was keeping something to himself. After a quick tour of the inn, he showed me to my room, a quaint little space with antique furniture, floral wallpaper, and a large four-poster bed. It was beautiful, albeit a little cold, but the chill in the air didn't bother me. After all, it was a historic building, and I expected it to feel a bit drafty. The first night went by uneventfully. I had a peaceful dinner in the inn's dining room, which was dimly lit by candlelight, and spent the evening reading by the fire in the sitting room. The atmosphere was soothing, and I began to relax into the peaceful solitude of the place. That was until the second night. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of footsteps outside my door. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, the old wooden floors creaking under the weight of time. But then, I heard a soft knock on the door. I froze. I wasn't expecting any visitors. I hadn't spoken to anyone since dinner, and Martin had told me there were no other guests. I sat up in bed, trying to calm my racing heart, telling myself it was probably just my mind playing tricks on me. I slowly got up, my bare feet touching the cold wooden floor, and walked cautiously toward the door. I hesitated before I opened it. There was no one there. I checked the hallway, but it was empty. The inn was silent, the only sound the occasional creak of the old building. I shrugged it off as a strange coincidence and returned to bed, trying to shake the unease that had crept into my chest. The next morning, I decided to talk to Martin about the incident. I found him sitting at a table in the dining room sipping coffee. He greeted me but seemed distracted, as if he was avoiding my gaze. "I heard something last night," I said casually, not wanting to sound paranoid. Footsteps outside my room, and a knock. Martin's expression changed. His face, which had been warm and friendly, now looked a little darker. He set his coffee down slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "I'm sorry if you were disturbed," he said, his voice quieter now. "This old place, it's got its share of oddities. It's been around for a long time and, well, sometimes things happen." I pressed him further, asking if anyone else had experienced anything strange. He seemed reluctant to answer, but finally, after a long pause, he spoke. "Years ago, this place was full of life. People would come from all over. But then there was an incident, a tragedy, really. My grandmother told me about it. One of the guests disappeared, vanished without a trace." I raised an eyebrow. "Disappeared?" "Yes," he replied, his eyes darkening. "They searched everywhere, but she was never found. People said she had been acting strangely in the days leading up to her disappearance, saying she heard voices in the walls, that someone was watching her. The police never found any evidence of foul play, but the rumors about this place, well, they've lingered. Some say it's haunted." I stared at him, stunned. I had no idea what to make of his words. Martin seemed to notice my discomfort and quickly stood up. "I shouldn't have told you that," he muttered. "I apologize. It's an old story, a rumor." But the rest of the day was strange. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I decided to take a walk around the inn, hoping to clear my head. As I wandered through the hallways, I couldn't help but notice something odd. The rooms that were closed off, marked with "Do Not Enter" signs. One of them, the last room at the end of the hall, had a strange, heavy door, one that looked newer than the rest of the building. That night, as I prepared for bed, I noticed something strange. The room felt colder than usual. The wind outside howled and the trees swayed violently. But as I lay in bed trying to sleep, I heard something again. A faint shuffling sound coming from the hallway. Curiosity got the better of me, and I gently tried the door handle. It was locked, but there was a small window at the top of the door. I stood on my tiptoes and peered inside, but the room was pitch dark. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I heard footsteps behind me and spun around. It was Martin. "I told you not to go near that room," he said, his tone suddenly serious. "Please just forget about it." I was taken aback by his sternness, but he didn't give me a chance to respond. He turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, a sinking feeling in my stomach. The next morning I was gone. I packed my bags and left the inn without saying a word to Martin. The strange chill, the locked room, and the way he reacted, it all felt wrong. I still wonder what was in that room, and it's a mystery that has haunted me ever since.